I was like, I don't think I can go through. Like, I was like, oh, I was at Mesosphere at the time, and it was like,
Right.
whoa, I don't think I can hang with the FTO folk. But they were really nice. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was like,
No, they were all very welcoming, I have to say. And
yeah.
they even all they gracefully answered, gracefully answered all my stupid questions as well. So, so hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. And today I'm very pleased to be able to start a series of talks with Harness. We're going to be really focusing on three different areas of the whole sort of space around DevOps and things like that. This particular one is going to be focusing on some of the terminology and some of the technology and solutions around the sort of DevOps space. We'll also get a chance in the second part to go to looking at the solutions from Harness. And then hopefully in part 3, we'll also do a demo of the Harness solution itself. And in order to go through all of that, I have with me Ravi Lachhman. Hello, Ravi. How are you doing today?
Hey, Richard, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Pleasure to have you. Ravi, I wanted to kind of just ask you to start with an intro for sort of yourself and also for kind of Harness and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'm Ravi Lachhman. I run the evangelism, community, and dev advocacy team at Harness. So really focus on the ecosystem. If you're unfamiliar with Harness, Harness is a software delivery platform. So basically our goal is to allow anybody, regardless of size or creed, to deploy, like, there's an acronym called FANG. So it's like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. And if you take a look at those organizations, they have hundreds of engineers focused on engineering efficiency, but not everyone has access to those resources. But with Harness, we're trying to enable everyone to deploy a software in similar fashion as a FANG organization.
Fantastic. And what kind of sort of technologies and solutions do you guys focus on? I mean, this whole sort of space of DevOps and things like that is quite vast. So I just kind of want to see where you guys are kind of, pinpointed at.
Yeah, so we have an interesting, like, we're kind of sandwiched in the middle. So we're a pipeline orchestrator, if you want to dig into it a little bit more. So we really focus on the CI/CD pipeline and all of the auxiliary items it takes to go from idea to production. And so let's say that we had an idea, we can get into like what that takes for us to actually get it off our local machine and then into some sort of test environment, and then vet the tests and vet the changes out, and then get it into production safely. And so at Harness, if you take a look at the CI/CD space, we're kind of an odd duckling. We are, unlike other tooling, we are opinionated on how you go to production, but we're unopinionated where you go to production. So
Right.
I'll focus on the latter part. Certain tools focus on certain stacks, like, oh, you know what, this is a cloud native Kubernetes tool. Might be for more advanced listeners, if, like, for example, a new term is called GetOps. So those particular tools are focused on Kubernetes specifically. Harness, we're not. We treat pretty much every type of deployment, application deployment, as a first class citizen. So if you're going to be on-prem or physical or into a VM, it doesn't matter for us. We're unopinionated. If you're going to serverless or if you're going to Kubernetes, sure, it's another endpoint. But where we are opinionated is how you get there. So I'm not sure if the listeners are familiar with a game called Blackjack or 21. We're like the blackjack dealer.
Some might be.
We'll tell you if you're messing up. Like, hey, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't double down or split those cards. We'll tell you when going, like, when transversing a pipeline. Hey, you know what? You're doing a canary release. How are you validating the canary release? Or, hey, what happens in a failure scenario if this happens? So we're kind of poking and prodding you along with the guardrails and opinionation that, hey, these are orthogonal concerns that you should take a look at, and we make it pretty easy to implement those concerns in the product.
Excellent. So yeah, so I kind of, like I said, we wanted to focus on this particular talk about that sort of whole DevOps space and some of those sort of terminology in that space. So maybe a good start will be kind of, the definition of DevOps. What is DevOps to you guys?
Yeah, so DevOps, it's a culture, right? And so there's if you Google DevOps, or you just can't have a DevOps, right? If you can't buy a DevOps, it's a trifecta of things, but mainly DevOps is a culture.
Mm.
If you take a look at where the movement came from, there's usually two sets of people who are involved in any sort of technical change. There's the development side, so the dev part of DevOps, those in charge of making the features. And then there's the operations side, or the ops side of DevOps, who is in charge of making sure that the lights are on, right? So the
Right.
operational side. And those two camps, I definitely lived before, during, before the DevOps movement, and also during the DevOps movement as a practitioner. They're two different sets of goals. As a developer, you're incentivized to get features out the door. As an operations professional, you're incentivized to reduce change, because that's dangerous, right? Or that
Sure.
can change can be a detriment to downtime, or be a detriment to uptime, causes downtime,
Mm.
and reduce risk, right? So you want to limit change. But how do you merge those two cultures, right? Like, how do you take the best of part A and the best of part B to have a common goal?
Yeah.
And that is like my definition of DevOps as a
Sure.
culture.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously there's kind of branches of that where things like DevSecOps has been introduced, where you're kind of doing security within that whole sort of process. And then obviously DevOps kind of takes you away from the traditional way of developing applications into kind of this more agile methodology. And then that kind of, I guess, leads to organizations kind of creating a process or a so-called pipeline when you're actually doing your sort of development. So just briefly, kind of on pipeline, or sort of a development pipeline, what does it actually sort of consist of? What are the sort of the main components of that?
The mythical development pipeline. So if you're looking for a DevOps job, usually they include like maintain the development
Yeah,
pipeline, create the development pipeline. But
yeah.
what is that? What is this
What
development
is
pipeline?
that? Hmm.
This unicorn of a pipeline that we talk about.
Yeah,
No, it's not a physical pipeline. It's not a piece of iron that's hollowed out. It could be just pictures of stuff like that, or
yeah,
memes. But
yeah,
so if you're going back to kind of one of the original things we started the conversation, it's you're going from how do you go from some sort of change or an idea all the
yeah.
way to the end user, right? What does
Mm.
that journey look like? And I'll kind of get a little intrinsic here. Like if you're an engineer just starting out, or coming out of uni, or coming out of school, surprise, the group project never ends. That one class or two classes you hated working with other people,
Yeah,
that's actually how your professional life's going to be. It's software is a team sport.
yeah.
There's always more than one person working on it, and that took me a long time to think. Well, it took me my first job to figure that out. Like,
Right.
oh yeah, I just can't write something alone. And so
Right.
basically the pipeline is facilitating those interactions, right?
Yeah.
So
So
not
I
only,
can't just sit in one corner and just kind of code away.
yeah,
Right.
it eventually has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And also another part of it, it's there, you have to interact with decisions that you made, you have to interact with decisions that you haven't made. And also, like any sort of, when you're, with the more experience you become, you start to realize that there's a lot of decisions that happened before I came on this project or this team, and there's going to be a lot of decisions after I leave, right? And so it's
Sure.
really orchestrating a couple concerns. One, how do you safely go from your idea to production? And also, how do you navigate the particular multiple points of view, and how do you navigate the multiple people that you have to interact with?
Sure.
And so starting the pipeline will basically facilitate that. Hey, you know what? I have some source code. Depending on the language, you have a build, right? And then depending on modern ways, there's quality and confidence building steps that are imposed. So not only that you have a code review from your development side, there's test suites that have to get run. There's we can talk for an hour on different testing methodologies, and when you scratch the surface, but we'll lump all those into confidence building steps. Maybe some other type of approvals that have to go on, even packaging, right? Like if we focus on the Java-esque example, you build a Java jar, but then you might package it in a Docker image, right? So there's packaging that goes on.
Yeah.
And then even more so, we're enriching it with environmental information and secrets as it traverses along environment to environment.
Sure.
And then again, facilitating the flow of your particular ideas, again, in a particular package to different environments until it reaches the end customer, right?
Sure.
So in production, so a pipeline can be soup to nuts from check-in to deploy.
Right. And you mentioned, I picked up just on one word there, you said confidence. And I think that's a really good kind of word to use in that whole sort of process. And that as you kind of move from one stage to the next, as we'll kind of see on some of the sort of major aspects of it, is that you're continuing to build confidence in what you've written. And I think that's a really great way to actually put that. So I kind of went to the internet as people do, and looked up on the web the definition of CI/CD, which is really the kind of the continuous integration and continuous delivery or continuous deployment. And I'm not always a kind of a massive fan of sort of stuff that you can read on the internet. But I did look it up on Wikipedia, and it said CI/CD bridges the gap between development and operational activities and teams by enforcing automation in build, testing, and deployment of applications. And I guess that's kind of probably a good sort of summary sentence of, and kind of captures that, I guess, quite well. So we kind of mentioned that, it comes into this process. The kind of process can be sort of called a pipeline, if you like, and it was kind of mentioned some of those sort of stages. But let's focus a little bit more on the pipeline itself. And what's kind of the first area there? There's a lot of kind of mention about things like repos or repositories. There's a lot obviously to unpack in that, but what's kind of what does that all mean? What is a sort of a source repo versus maybe an image repo or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also one point before I jump into that question I want to
Sure.
bring up is that just about that definition. And for the listeners, keep this in the back of your head. Like pipelines have to support three things. They have to support iteration. If you watch how I develop software, it's not pretty. I have to try things like 100 times before I get it right. And so it's actually true. If you watch some pundits on the internet, they just blaze through these coding examples. Like,
Yes.
I don't know anybody professionally who does that, because
It does that.
I
Yeah.
have to keep trying and trying and trying. And the more experience you get, you might be a little more focused on how you try, but you're still going to try a lot.
Yes.
Also, orchestrating confidence through that, which we touched upon, and also focusing on velocity too. How quickly can you get through supporting both of those ready dials? So going back to Richard, to your original question there, so a source repo versus an artifact or a binary repo. So source control, that's basically it. So go back to the example, software is a group project, right? So if you're writing something by yourself, who cares? You know what? Stored in SharePoint for all I care, but you're not writing something by yourself. And so there's all these methodologies that, how do you go about taking the idea, let's say Richard and I are in a team, how do you go about merging ideas between what Richard has and I have? Well, that's where source control comes in. So the most popular one today is Git, but there's the whole source control or VCS, version control system, that have been out for a long time. So it's the punch card, how you organize things. They've been evolving so long. And so basically the main point of source control is we're able to tie that a specific, let's say, feature is a specific version or branch. Also, how do we manage conflicts between Richard and I? Diffs, right? Richard made that change. I don't agree with it. Or how do I reintegrate it back to my particular stream?
Yeah.
And so that's source code. It's basically the words we write, the instructions we give the computer. Now, unfortunately, computers don't understand English or words. And so they only understand zeros and ones. Yeah. And so this is where the binaries come in, right? And so at some point, you need to translate to 0 and 1. Either it's language dependent, right? So JavaScript developer might be like, what's interpreted or whatnot. But at some point, there needs to be some sort of packaging that eventually will be understood by the computer, the instructions. Right. And so this is where the binaries come in. If you take a look at modern software development, there's a proliferation of open source, right? So if we were building something, we wouldn't really focus on, let's say, the piping, but we'll focus on the rules. So like, sending a message is given. We know how to do that. So we might use JMS, or might use a modern queue like Kafka, but those are open source projects. Yeah. And so we're basically taking the dependencies of everything that we particularly defined and just organizing them. And so for an artifact repository, you can be storing third-party open source or internally written packages. And then your final build is a culmination of both of those things. So what you've written, what you have not written, but that's the kind of delineation to the source code repo, or the instructions, the machine readable things or understandable things, or the binary repos. and you can dial those in, and that's what you deploy. And with the combination of those two, you have something that you can give the customer eventually.
Sure. Yeah. So that's kind of a clear distinction there. Where one is kind of focusing on where you store your source code after you've kind of committed that, and then the other one is kind of really beginning the sort of the process of packaging, compiling, packaging that are bringing in lots of different libraries and whatever else the application needs, and so on. Excellent. So other parts of that sort of whole kind of pipeline as we go through that include things like sort of a whole, I guess you'd call that a source code kind of management system. So you mentioned kind of Git, there's obviously other ones like GitHub and GitLab and various other ones. But then we kind of also, there's a lot of focus on tools like Jenkins. So where does kind of Jenkins come in? What is the role of Jenkins in that whole sort of CI/CD pipeline?
Yeah, so Jenkins is, I would say, where continuous integration became mainstream. So if you take a look at the lineage of the Jenkins project, it actually came from a Oracle project called Hudson, and there was a precursor to that too. And so if you take a look at this, like the very basic steps that it took for us to do a build on our machines, like I'll focus on Java since Jenkins was very focused on Java when it, from its inception. So, okay, I need to run some sort of build command, let that be Ant back in the day, or Maven or Gradle or Ivy in the Java world today. And then there's also other particular steps I have to do to make a Java build successful, right? And so Jenkins was an automation engine saying, okay, given these are the steps, it used to be lift and shift, like, you know what, run these Maven commands, now Jenkins can externalize that. And that's basically the lineage of where continuous integration came, right? Is externalizing the build is a very simplistic way of talking about continuous integration. Because when you externalize the build, the build is now repeatable. Again, going back to the confidence word, you're now confident that not only did Ravi's instructions worked on his laptop, they can probably work somewhere else, which is the main goal, to build something. And so Jenkins became kind of that conduit of automation. And so, but continuous integration is only one, that CI part is only part of CI/CD. Like having the build and publishing the artifact to an artifact repo, it's very prudent, right? That's what Jenkins was known for. But looking into delivery aspects of it, being an unopinionated automation engine, taking the artifact to production is a whole other beast. Right, like it's completely different, the steps that you have to do, because they become less systemic and they become more snowflakey, right? So it's we build by convention. Like a building in Java is convention based, like Maven is Maven is Maven is Maven. But from a personal anecdote, I counted it up. I was on 13 separate development teams, unlucky number, in my career. So 13. We deploy differently in every one of those teams. I've been a J2E or JE engineer for most of my career. So I took my design patterns and my knowledge with me, but every single team deployed differently, because again, it's software is a team sport. It's a culmination of all the technology decisions that we made. And how does it run in production is completely different than any other team that's been on. So this is where the CD portion comes in.
Yeah, and it's kind of so just before get to kind of the CD part, but you're right, it's kind of the concepts and the main sort of aspects are all there, but how it's kind of formed, as you said, kind of differs from one development team to the other one. So so just kind of focusing on the continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So what's the kind of difference between, what do those actually mean? What's the difference between them?
So there's two CDs. It's not compact disc, because I have a joke with people. My car, I don't even know where to, if someone gave me a compact disc today, I don't know where to play it. Like my laptop doesn't have one, my cars don't have one.
Yeah, how do I do it?
I don't even think I have a DVD player anymore.
You need an external wires USB things, I think.
Even USB
but
is
that'll take this talk to the tech support kind of.
I have a disk. What do I do? But delivery and deployment. So let's focus on deployment first. So in modern architecture, you're not deploying to one spot, right? We live in a distributed systems world for many reasons. It could be for availability, it can be for performance, it can be for a multitude of reasons, right? But you're not
Yeah.
deploying to one spot. So
Yeah.
modern example is you have multiple Kubernetes clusters, or you have multiple clusters of anything. It can be VMs, it can be OpenStack, it can be Kubernetes, pick your poison. You have multiple destinations. So continuous deployment focuses on the ability to quickly deploy to those places. So it might be I deploy to a cluster manager and the cluster manager deploys for me. Congratulations, you're able to deploy when you need to in an automated fashion. But deployment's only half the battle, right? Now the delivery part, the other CD, and this is the part that Harness more focuses on, but there is a deployment aspect to it. Is that going back to those my 13 team examples? Even though we had similarities, the confidence building steps and the safety mechanisms are all different. We had to do things in a certain order every time. You know what? The database changes have to go out first, or B, we need to pull, more often than not, there's an order of operations for us pulling nodes out of rotation to upgrade them and then say, okay, let's go validate, make sure that all transient data is flushed out and transactions are flushed out. Like there's a lot of concerns with that. And that's where continuous delivery focuses on. How do you safely get your changes into production? And safety is in the eye of the beholder, right? I've been on teams that I straight up deployed to production, like I was a principal engineer. So it's like, you own the feature, go for it. Versus I've been on teams that, there's several people who were involved and there was a change control board. And so like with those two different ends of the spectrum, continuous delivery focuses on merging the best of both. The confidence that having an extensive change control board would have, and also with the flexibility of, hey, you want to be rapid to get those changes out. And just making safety patterns like a canary release. So if the listeners are unfamiliar with a canary, it's an homage to the canary in the coal mine. And so it's basically it's an incremental release. You release, you deploy a small amount, validate the traffic, and keep incrementing until you reach 100%. So the canary becomes a stable and they swamp. And that's all part of continuous delivery, is making sure that that's just one part of the safety, the physical deployment, being safe, and also orchestrating all the confidence building tests that you have to do, like performance tests, soak tests, like how are you sure the features max expectation by the time it hits the end user?
Sure. Yeah, and obviously there's kind of a lot more to cover in that. We can probably be able to do that, well, everything justice in this particular talk. But so we kind of really covered sort of everything from sort of writing code and where sort of your sort of source code goes into kind of SCMs or source code management systems, moving that source code from the sort of the source repo into a kind of a build stage. That's where you kind of compile your application, your executables or binaries, executables for Windows users, binaries for those open source and Linux users, and then kind of getting into that sort of a release stage where you're effectively start to move things into test environments and eventually production environments, as you said. So obviously, like I said, we can go obviously much deeper with that. Look at things like static code analysis tools, the building stage, test and dev before you go into production. So you do your kind of QA or quality assurance, user acceptance testing, the UAT, at the release stage as well. But I think that's kind of it was kind of a quick rush through sort of the main aspects of it and the definitions of that. So the other thing we were talking just before we kind of started the conversation was you were talking about sort of platform engineering and culture. There was something you kind of mentioned that, and I thought that would be really good to kind of include as well.
Yeah. And so I think the importance of platform engineering culture is becoming more important in modern development technology organizations. So what does that mean? So going back to my 13 team examples, well, why did I work on 13 separate teams? There were over several employers, right? So I probably worked at 8 or 9 different employers. And so in technology, there's this old, either stigma or what you have to do. It's like, you have to change jobs, right? Like most people would give you that advice that you need to change jobs to get more experience and to get more pay, let's be frank. get more of an hourly rate or more salary.
We're covering everything in this talk, aren't we, Ravi?
Yeah. But there's, but why do you change teams? Well, there's a myriad of reasons. You want to get more domain experience, or you want to get different sort of technical experience. There's just, I want to work in a different domain. I want to work in a different tech stack. It makes me a better engineer. You help further your craft as an engineer. Both very valid reasons. But what's happening now is that there used to be a very tight coupling of, let's say, a development team to a feature or to a product, right? So it used to, for my days, and even when I was a development manager, I was a pseudo application owner, right? Saying, hey, you know what? I'm not only am I the development manager for this team, my team is responsible for these two applications, and basically, as a member of my team, you were tied to me for your human resources and also your skills development, right? And you were tied to the application for that. And so with this modern rise, so I like to call it this Spotify model. If you go to any agile coach, they'll play you that 4-minute Spotify video from 2014 with squads and tribes. But it makes sense, right? It's like the software teams shifting to a more consulting model, right? So your people manager or development managers focused on growing your skill sets, regardless of what application you're working on. And then self-organizing with particular squads or tribes that, hey, let's focus on the billing part of the application, with these 6 engineers, or let's focus on making something more resilient with these 7 engineers, or let's focus on doing April Fool's joke with this one engineer, right? So it's basically just how you self-organize. But where platform engineering comes into that is that there needs to be common tools between the teams. Going again on Lucky 13, I don't think I use exactly the same tools in any one of those 13 teams. So there was always a learning curve every time I joined a team. Some teams had less of a learning curve. Some teams had a lot more learning curve than other teams, just because how we were going to production, right? Like that's the most scary part. I don't want to break anything, right? Like I took my Java with me, but going to prod is not. And so having more of a standardized way of these engineering efficiency tools, let it be, no matter where in the organization you are, we're using Get. So, you know how to commit code, or no matter where we are, we're using these particular set of build tools. So you know how to build something, but the features you build are different. No matter where you are in the organization, we go to production one of 3 ways, right? And so like producing that menu or that platform engineering experience for your engineers, it's giving them choice and also limiting the choice, but yet giving them flexibility. So it's 2 parts of the equation. So no matter what squad or tribe they go to, they're able to fulfill A, they feel good about they delivered something, and B, they didn't have to stress about, because with squads and tribes, you actually change a lot, right? It's not like, let's say I work for Rich or Richard's, like, you expect me to be on your team for 3 years. Tough, like usually we don't last that long. Maybe 6 months or 3 months or a month or a week or a sprint. That's facilitated now with
and you're absolutely right in terms of we said, we kind of spoke earlier about it, not being it's not all kind of set in one particular way. There's lots of different ways of doing the same thing. So although you may be changing teams or even organizations, you can bring some of that sort of skill set and sort of experience with you, but obviously you'll probably be working potentially on different tools. Some of them might be the same, but some other ones may not be, and that kind of gives you that sort of extra experience or different experience. And that obviously means then that translates to you personally becoming a much better, sort of developer or whatever it is that you're doing within those teams. And that obviously then translates to your organization, that they can actually get more, more skills from you as well in terms of what they've, employed you to do. Excellent. Okay, so I think that was kind of interesting that the space is quite varied. It's quite broad in terms of the technologies. There's no specific way of doing something. There's a lot of differences. You mentioned in your experience with development, everybody's kind of done things differently. And I think that's kind of probably covers the some of the sort of the basic concepts that we really wanted to go through in this particular talk. So Ravi, thank you very much for spending the time with me to go through all of that. We'll obviously be doing more talks together. There's a kind of hopefully, like I said earlier, we'll be doing a sort of a few other parts to this particular series and covering more of the harness solutions and looking at the harness sort of products as well and doing a demo of those. And so everything, if people kind of folks want to look up things, Ravi, where's the best place to go for harness solutions and products?
Yeah, absolutely. Check out our website at www.harness.io, or you can just email me. It's very easy. It's Ravi, R-A-V-I, at harness.io. I have a very lengthy email address. So yeah, happy to connect and happy to help educate.
Excellent. That's very brave of you, I have to say. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ravi. Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Please do subscribe if you get a chance, if you enjoyed the talk, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe. See you next time.